I honestly feel like sometimes they feel like they've already paid the price by feeling bad about it.
You're listening to Nonprofits Today, the podcast that showcases the incredible impact nonprofits have in our ever-changing world. The podcast that gets the pulse on today's economic, social, political, and humanitarian climate straight from frontline leaders, innovative changemakers, and courageous risk takers in our communities and around the globe. And now, without further ado, here's your host, Sarah Box.
Welcome to the Nonprofits Today podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Box. I am super excited to introduce to you today's guest, Robyn Spoon. Robyn is a seasoned leader and advocate in the childhood cancer community. As the CEO and founder of Elevate Childhood Cancer Research and Advocacy, Robyn has dedicated her life to enhancing the development of new therapies for children with cancer through innovative advocacy and building strong coalitions. So advocacy's already come up a couple of times. That's an important aspect of Robyn's work. And her journey is both a professional achievement and a deeply personal experience, having navigated the complex challenges of childhood cancer within her own family. So with that as a very brief introduction, let's formally welcome Robyn Spoon to the podcast. Hi, Robyn.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today.
Well, I'm glad we could make this work out on the timing, and let's dive right in. So, Robyn, your personal and your professional life intersected on the intensely challenging way with your son's cancer diagnosis and that path. So, how did that shape your approach to leadership and advocacy in the childhood cancer arena?
Yeah, how did it shape? I was definitely not in the childhood cancer space before Justin was diagnosed with cancer. I was working in advocacy related to education and really dealing with multi-stakeholder, big, hairy sort of problems in education. And then when my son was diagnosed with childhood cancer, he was actually 21 at the time, it introduced me to a problem that was more complicated and more messy than really any that I'd ever seen.
So you already had a background in advocacy and understanding that whole, because it's a specific mindset when you think advocacy, and you're thinking, what are you going to do? What are you going after? But education can be, but it's not as impersonal necessarily as your child getting a diagnosis with something. And I think you actually mentioned in one of our earlier conversations that kind of the current state of childhood cancer resource and research is not good. It's one of the messiest projects you've ever seen. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, for sure. The day that my son was diagnosed, we were handed a piece of paper from kind of a regional healthcare center. He was diagnosed in the middle of COVID in the fall of 2020, and we were literally handed a sheet of paper that named his disease, which was rhabdomyosarcoma, which I couldn't say. It was so long. And then I saw that the documentation that I had said that there were probably only about between 350 and 500 cases of this particular kind of cancer a year. And my little research brain that came out of education research, where I was working in kind of a niche field of research, when I knew that the numbers were kind of small, that made all the alarm bells went off for me, because I know that when we have rare conditions or small populations of people, maybe people who've been underrepresented in some way, then the likelihood that we have a lot of resources on it is going to be small. And so that immediately set off this fear in me, honestly, as a mother, that this was probably going to be problematic. And within another week or two after that, we found out that the average age of the drugs he was getting ready to be given were about 40 to 50 years old. Half of them were FDA approved before we ever put a man on the moon. And that his doctor said to us, it's not because they're good, it's because it's what we have. And so that was my first clue that everything that my brain had thought about what I had seen in the marketing world, or what I had developed some belief about. In my mind, if somebody had asked me some question about what do you think about childhood cancer and treatments, I think I probably would have said, well, it seems like it's pretty survivable. It turns out it's really a tough space. These kids are getting treated with these incredibly old treatments, and I found out very quickly that it was poorly funded. That pharmaceutical industry was not particularly interested in developing therapies for kids because it wasn't going to make a lot of money, and that it was going to take a lot of stakeholders to really shift or change this environment around developing new therapies for kids.
So, in the research on childhood cancer, did that parallel like the available drugs as well? So like there's not current research, or very much because it may not be a profitable place. Is that because of the small numbers of that particular type of cancer or the age group?
I think all the things, all of it makes it messy. And so when we think about it, like, first of all, we think childhood cancer, many of us probably, if you see, an ad or you see something out in the social world, you hear childhood cancer. The reality is that there are 12 different main types of childhood cancer, and of that, there's about 100 subtypes. And so you've got about 15,000 kids a year diagnosed with about 100 different unique types of disorders. I think that makes it challenging. I think that doing research on kids, we spent a lot of time in the last 50 years trying to protect kids from research by protecting them through regulations and things. And maybe it's time for that pendulum to swing to say, let's protect kids with research. And so this is a space that we need to really start to evolve, like, do no harm for a kid. There's a lot of restrictions around testing new things on kids that don't exist for adults. And so I'm working with some organizations to break down some of those barriers as well. The problem is systemic. I mean, between the low numbers, even though this is in fact the number one cause of death by disease in our children, and even the kids who do survive go on to have, on average, 90% of them end up with a grade 3 medical problem or greater, meaning they're going to end up with congestive heart failure, they're going to have a secondary cancer or something like that. It's a really tough place to be. We need to do something in this space, and we've got to break down some of these barriers that are getting in the way. So I found out that it's really like a lot of stakeholders. You've got academia, you've got biotech, you've got regulatory agencies, you've got legislators and funding. And since this has been a market failure. This is not a place that the free market's really interested in investing.
So where do you start your advocacy with all of those stakeholder groups?
Probably like I do a lot of other things. I think I work in circles. So it's such an iterative thing. I've got my hands in a lot of different places. First of all, there have been a lot of organizations that have come before me. I mean, I'm certainly not the first person, nor will I be the last that tries to tackle this thing. I think we started Elevate because when I went looking for an organization that we could be a part of, I really wanted to do something in this capacity building space. My background was in multi-stakeholder problem solving. I'm a design thinker by trade, and I started trying to think about how do we really define the problems? How do we start to ideate solutions? How do we take multiple stakeholders and bring them together? And there have been some attempts to do that, but that was really my niche. And I wasn't really finding a spot to do quite, what I felt like I felt led to do or called to do.
So how have you been received by those who were already kind of out there before here comes this Robyn kid, with the design approach?
I mean, I think pretty well for the most part, because I think that if as a leader, I have a lot of big ideas, and I consider myself pretty feisty, and I'm in a hurry. Kids are getting diagnosed. Just in the state that I come from, I am sitting in Indiana right now in this conversation, and every single day in the state of Indiana, a child's diagnosed with cancer. That's our statistic every day.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And about every 5 days, a child in our state is going to die from cancer. And that's just right here in little Indiana, right? So I'm in a hurry, but I think the most important thing that a leader can do, especially when they're the new kid on the block in this space, I'm not the new kid on the nonprofit block, but like the new kid on the block in this space, is be curious, value institutional knowledge. So I mean, I'm on some, national policy teams and things like that I've been invited to do. I think I listen for as long as I possibly can until the pieces start to come together, and try to ask questions, try to tell people and remind them how grateful I am for everything they've done up to this moment. And I think that's really, for me, that's probably my approach. Maybe other people have other advice, but that's how I've tried to approach it.
Well, one of the things you said about like you kind of circle around and around with folks, I got a mental picture of you building these relationships where you're going in curious with a design mindset, right? So and I interpret that to having listened at national levels or local levels, to hearing these good ideas, but helping people connect them in a broader way. Am I on the right track?
Yeah, I would definitely say that's true. And then within the scope of like Elevate, we have these work groups where we've got one focused on 2 different kinds of disease type of rhabdomyosarcoma and then Wilms tumor, that's a pediatric renal tumor. And what we try to do, even at that basic advocacy level, is we try to take people that we feel like are also frustrated and that have been kind of what I would consider sort of screaming in a tunnel. They're screaming, they're using their voice, but they maybe just need to be able to get it in the right spot. We've put them together in these work groups, and then we give them the space to rise up the ideas that matter to them, and then try to understand what does our organization have the capacity to do and change versus who do we need to partner with for some of the bigger ideas. Like, for example, we may be able to put together some really great educational materials on cancer predisposition that gets out to the families so they can understand how to make decisions. But then when we want to start to do something like build a patient registry, I'm going to try to build a coalition to build a patient registry.
Well, that's the kind of thing that everybody benefits from.
Right.
Right. I mean, not that everybody wouldn't benefit from education, but when you're in a space and there's a registry and you can link people and help them through that, that's a powerful incentive to play.
It is. Yeah. And I think that's where you have to understand, like, as a nonprofit, I try to understand and stay really missionally aligned. What do we feel like aligns with the mission that we have created internally, and what do we have the capacity to do versus what do we really need to collaborate with for a variety of reasons with others, whether it's like we're going to be able to push better funding in, whether it's that the diversity of voices is going to be really important versus like, whereas our organization may not have that diversity in terms of different perspectives, when we go and we join forces with other organizations, then we're able to maybe have different viewpoints, different kinds of expertise and things like that, better access to the scientists, the oncologists, the people that we're really trying to help. Those are the people we see as the heroes, those scientists that are doing the work. We're like, how do we help support their work? So
let's take a step back, because you talked about your organization, your mission, and staying aligned with that. So what is the core mission of your organization?
Yeah, so Elevate seeks to dramatically improve the lives of those diagnosed with pediatric cancer, from diagnosis to treatment on to survivorship, and in some cases at the end of a child's life. And we have 2 different sort of ways that we go about doing that. One is to empower advocates to be able to use their voices, and also at the patient advocate caregiver level, give them the best quality of information that they have available to them so that they can make decisions on behalf of their children. And then the other is to expedite the development of new therapies by breaking down barriers among stakeholders.
What has been one of the surprises for you in doing this work?
A surprise.
You've been hit with a lot of challenges? I mean, like something that you may not have expected that just you went, whoa, I didn't see that coming.
The places where I've been invited to have a seat at the table quickly. I think I've been surprised to be invited to go to the FDA and speak on behalf of what families and kids want and need. I think I've been surprised by the welcome. Last summer, I was invited to speak at this big symposium of international scientists for pediatric renal cancer. My kid didn't have pediatric renal cancer. There's been a lot of other things, and I find myself standing in front of a bunch of scientists and getting a warm welcome. I think the other thing that surprised me is how much I've been told that advocacy sometimes is an outsider, and that it can be tough to get a seat at the table with scientists and others. And that hasn't been the case for me. I feel like that's been a lovely surprise to find out that they're like, hey, join up. The most fun thing I get to do is to tell scientists that I can't get fired. And that basically, if you
that
share,
means you can help them because you can be a voice.
Yeah. I've gotten some pretty big rounds of applause on that one. And so that's one of the things I've learned to be able to say is like, hey, let me know what I can do and what we can do, because advocates can't get fired, and I have nothing left to lose at this point. I mean, I have 2 other beautiful living children, but half my heart, if not more of it, left on March 23rd of 2023 when my beautiful young son died from rhabdomyosarcoma. And so it's a very freeing, I mean, that's crazy sounding. It's an incredibly freeing thing when you're advocating on behalf of something, because it's like, nobody has to question, like, is she doing it to try to save her kid's life? Is she doing it? No, I mean, it's pretty altruistic at this point.
Yeah. Well, and it's showing other people they can do the same, Robyn, who may feel voiceless.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. How do you think advocacy is different, perhaps? And it may not be, so I often assume things are. But how might it be different in the world you're treading in, or the waters you're treading in, than versus some of the other advocacy that you see going on?
I don't know that I can answer that. Are you talking about like in a different domain, for example?
Yeah, like maybe a different sector. So maybe advocacy around not necessarily health and a specific disease, but maybe advocacy around environmental or advocacy in different arenas.
It's emotional. And I think all of it can be emotional, because I think that if somebody really cares about something and they're very passionate about something, it can be very emotional. What we find is that sometimes when we go in to educate someone about this childhood cancer tragedy, really, whether that's a legislator, whether that is a possible funder, someone that might help fund or support the work, this might sound bad, but I'm just going to say it anyway. And that is that I don't want them to feel so bad that they feel that having the feelings was action. So sometimes I've learned that it's like, if I leave somebody like a legislator with this feeling like, oh, I feel really, really, really bad that these kids have died and whatever, I honestly feel like sometimes people they feel like they've already paid the price by feeling bad about it. Does that make sense?
Well, actually, I've never heard it expressed that way, but when you say that, that's perfect, because, it's like, I don't want to feel that way again. I paid the price. So do you try to leave them with hope in the sense that there's something they can do to impact this?
Oh, yeah. And I think that's the big difference between awareness and advocacy. There's a lot of people who want to bring their awareness to an issue. And I think awareness is really important. But even at the very entry level of awareness, I feel like we ought to be giving somebody something they can do, especially with something like childhood cancer, but honestly, it could be environmentalism or something else. If you sit and tell somebody, oh man, this terrible, horrible, no good, very bad thing has happened. Children are suffering and children are dying. And then they go like this, oh, then I'm like, but by the way, you could share our social media posts. You could donate $10 a month. You could make a phone call to your legislator and let them know about this. You could connect families that you hear about to our organization. I think if you just if you just make someone aware of something, I don't know. Other people that are into the awareness space might have a different thing to say, but I feel like even at that early level, we ought to be fighting for some action.
Well, sometimes when people want me to be aware, if I don't know why they want me, like I'm left, and I don't want it to sound cynical, but I'm left with so what? What do you want me to do with this other than feel crappy?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So when they say, hey, so could you please use this bag? Could you please be on our list? Could you, just like you, right? And for the things that, we've both been made aware of, but they also resonate with us for whatever reason, it doesn't take much to keep the engagement, right? It's just that sense of, this is important, this is why, here's your part. And if you can do more, great. But if you can't do that, you're not a terrible person, because maybe your life's not in a place where you can do that right now.
Right. And I think that's what we do. We have to invite people to have the opportunity. What we find is people want to find a way to use, I mean, maybe this isn't true of all people, but most people want to try to find a way to use the gifts, the treasure, the time that they have to do something. Now, they may not feel called after they speak to me to do something about childhood cancer because maybe they're doing something else, right? Or maybe it's just not their thing, whatever, that's fine. But what I am amazed by is how many times when I say to somebody, hey, did you know our organization really needs somebody to help us with like creating a human resources chart or something like that? Oh, I would love to help with that for a couple of months. Oh, our organization needs A, B, C, and D. Could you help with that? We're running a concert to do a fundraiser. We need an MC. I'd love to help with that. And so I find that if we don't give people something that they can do, it just leaves them feeling bad. I don't think that's good.
Well, your examples were very specific, and in many cases, they were very time bound. So people don't feel like, oh my God, I can't do this forever, but I can help with the concert.
Yeah.
I could do this. So I think those in and of itself are a testament to your leadership and how you connect with people to go, okay, this is what's possible in this situation, but also keeping your mind aware of, this is a tiny thing, and be able to help with that to help you go further.
I think that you have to have one of the things that we tried to set out from the very beginning this time around. This is I think about my fifth go round of being involved in some kind of a nonprofit board. We built out kind of an organizational chart around our mission and our vision that's fairly short and long term, and then started building out what we thought we were going to need. And honestly, it makes it just a whole lot easier to be able to ask somebody. So when somebody says, what do you need help with? I'm like, well, here are 5 things that are going on right now. And I do think that most people want something that they can do that's time bound.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if people feel busy, and once people feel connected to you, they'll ask for more.
Right.
That was fun. How else could I help, Robyn?
Yeah. We find that to be true as well. It's all, what's really tough. I ran a real estate business early on in my career, which is funny. I have a degree in elementary education, but then ran a real estate business. And really, people are like, you've kind of done everything. I've had like 3 lives of careers.
So far.
Yeah, I think I'm in my twilight, hopefully. But I think what I learned then is true with everything. First of all, it's relationships. And second of all, it's picking up the phone and calling. And it's messaging directly. Trying to get people involved passively is just not that helpful. And there's got to be a lot of different ways that you can get people, involved. There's going to be people who, I'm amazed when somebody stops by my office and says, "Hey, I'd like to just write you a check for $2,500 today." And I'm like, "Thank you."
I'd love to receive it.
Yay. And then there's other times when we're like, hey, people want to be connected to the cause in a different way. So for Giving Tuesday last year, we partnered with Milk and Honey that makes like really nice products for lip balm and stuff like that. And they sent us products to send out to families, caregivers that are in the hospital with their kids, because the hospitals are super dry. And we said to people, if you donate $35, we can send one of these out, and then the rest of the money will go to research, which is really our thing. And then we were able to cover this nice gift to somebody without having to spend, money from the charity. And then at the same time, get people connected to the cause in a different way and support families in just like a little care kit, just a little love, a little hug. So lots of people need to be connected with on lots of levels. So,
yeah. Yeah. I really wasn't aware of childhood cancer until I met a woman who helped my husband, but she just like out of the blue, her kid, like he was 7, got a diagnosis. Yeah. And she said, your life just stops.
Oh, it is. I was 48 years old when my son was diagnosed. And, first of all, the idea that we had pediatric cancer was, outside of any kind of box I could have even imagined, because we had just sent our youngest son, who was 18 at the time, off to college. And our middle son was 21 at the time. Our oldest daughter was 23 at the time. And then our very healthy, nationally ranked runner son, he was ranked in the top 25 in the nation as a distance runner. Super crazy healthy, beautiful human being, was applying to graduate school to become a school psychologist. And then he got a little lump on his face. And in a place that it didn't belong. And we were in the middle of COVID, and, we finally get in for a head CT, and it looked concerning. And within a couple of weeks, we found ourselves behind the doors of the HEMONC unit at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, where over the course of 2.5 years between their University of Cincinnati Med Center and Seattle Children's, we spent 275 nights in the hospital. My husband and I became very well trained at delivering IV antibiotics at our home, doing wound care. I could tell you the various departments of hospitals. And I think the only night I'd ever spent the night in the hospital was during a pregnancy.
Yeah. And when you're living in it like that, it's just different.
Well, what we saw were very young parents from lots of different walks of life with very little kids. And my husband and I just kept saying to ourselves, oh my gosh, this is so complicated. We're barely keeping our head above water, and we're not trying to take care of other children at home. We're not, we both had been fairly successful in our careers, and our entire lives got turned upside down. And we found ourselves in the middle of, I remember walking out of his hospital room one day with a really bad infection that was caused by the treatments, walked out into the hallway at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, and there were 25 medical professionals standing in front of me. And I was like, we had literally like 16. So we've got infectious disease, we've got the oncology team, we've got the surgical team, we've got the dietetic team, we've got physical therapy. The pharmaceutical team is there. I came out, there wasn't enough room out in the hallway to deal with the team that was trying to solve his medical problem that was going on. They couldn't figure out what infection he had. And, to be able to manage that, that really drove us to say, how do families do things like get second opinions? How do they ask questions in meetings like that? And bigger than that, how do we keep them from ending up here by making sure that we have better treatments than the terrible stuff my kid was getting?
Yeah. And that set you on your path.
It did.
Yeah. I think that's an important distinction you make too, like that your children were older, so you weren't home trying to deal with them, and that whole balancing thing. 275 nights away and in a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
is more than half a year. It's almost
Yeah.
2/3 of the year. That's a lot. So what was happening with your other kids?
Yeah, our oldest daughter at the time was working on her PhD in computer science. That was really challenging for her as well. And our youngest son was at Indiana University trying to get his undergraduate degree. And especially with COVID and with the risk of infection, I mean, in pediatric cancer, they take the immune system pretty much to nadir. So like whenever you go in for a treatment, they're not gonna just be immunocompromised. They tend to be absent. And so they take them down to just nothing. And so in order to even be in or around Justin, they really had to be in a bubble. It was really hard. My daughter, actually, this is kind of a fun and weird fact. So my daughter and I are both going to graduate with our with our PhDs a week apart in May.
This coming May?
Yes.
Way to go.
And then my youngest son, Ryan, is actually going to graduate with his undergraduate degree also in that same week. So my daughter, my son, and I are all graduating with degrees the first week of May. May 3rd is me, and then my son and my daughter are both graduating from college. And each one of them taking a little bit longer. My journey to finish my PhD was extended by nearly 3 years. I was doing my comprehensive exam and doing my dissertation. I just submitted my dissertation this week. So,
wow,
it's been crazy.
Yeah. Stressful, crazy. The fact that you could focus on even doing that amongst everything else, and because you're there for your son.
Yeah. Yeah, it was tough. It was really tough. Gut wrenching at times, actually, trying to, and it was really my PhD. I know we're talking in circles a little bit, but it was really going back. I went back to get my PhD because I thought that I wanted to be able to have a bigger systemic effect in the education space that I was working in. And so my PhD is in educational psychology. And it's a research degree. And when I applied, I said, I just want to be better at answering the questions that I have. And so I took a bunch of stats classes, research methods and design and all the rest of it. And if not for that program, I don't think I would have understood what was really going on when they handed me that documentation for Justin. I certainly wouldn't understand the strengths and limitations of academia or some of the other pieces of how research comes about without that. And every semester I went back to get that degree, I would say to myself, what am I doing? I'm 47 years old. I'm living 2 hours away from home with 25-year-old graduate students. I don't need this degree. What am I doing? And every semester I would just kind of hang on. And then after he was diagnosed, it just really became clear to me that there was a purpose in all of it.
Yeah. Who knows what you're going to do with it? You'll see.
I'm doing with it now. It's okay.
I think sometimes, like you said, it helped you understand what was going on and understanding the limitations and stuff, because things can be presented as these are the facts. And when you look and go, well, let's look at the size, let's look at the process, what were the questions? And if you don't know that, you assume everything is okay.
I think that's a lot of a misunderstanding too about science in general, but that many of us have, and just even in problem solving in general. And I think that is that design background of me that I carry with me with everything that I do, which is just always looking to color outside the lines just a little bit and to better define the problem. One of the things that I learned in my PhD, even working with little children, is that the biggest mistake most of us make is not taking the time to clearly define the problem before we try to solve it. We oftentimes just go, I see a problem, fix it. And really, even little kids, the thing that we really ask them to do is to step back and say, wait, do you understand the problem you're trying to solve before you try to solve it? And even when the problem's really complicated, we ought to take, or at least my approach is to take the time to try to figure out what's really going on before we try to jump in and solve something that we don't understand.
So I would imagine you apply that when it comes to your advocacy work as well. What's the problem? What's the disconnect between the action people are taking and what we need taken. And
yeah, because that's where the creativity lives anyway. I mean, it's sort of like if you can really step back and say, here, tell me what's the problem. I remember I stood in front of a bunch of scientists in Denver about a year and a half ago, and everybody keeps talking about this problem with data. Oh, there's a problem with data. There's a problem with data. There's a problem with data. And I was like, I don't understand. What's the problem with the data? And I stood in front of all of them with a dry erase marker, and I just said, okay, can you first tell me, can we make a list on this board? I've got like 45 brilliant scientists from some of the most amazing institutions from around the world. I mean, everywhere. And I've got my dry erase marker, and I just said, could you just first tell me, what is this data you keep talking about? Is it like clinical data? Is it like tumor data? What is it? And then they started telling me, and I was like, wait, you're going too fast. And we're making this list. And I was like, and where is this data? And what's the problem with the data? And can we please try to fix this? And so then we started to create a plan. And I asked them to be honest with me. What's really the problem? Do we have some proprietary problems? Is it a funding problem? What is it? And there were a lot of problems, and we've got a lot of way to go to fix these problems, but I understand them better now.
Well, and it sounds like you have the engagement and the interest in fixing them.
Yes, I do think, because the individuals involved want to be able to do their work.
Sure.
But it's like if they need party A that has this piece of data and party B that has this part, or maybe it's Europe and the United States not being able to share data because of some kind of legal issue or something like that. Okay, well, how might we? So that's my favorite question: is how might we? How might we break down that problem, rather than because I get a lot of ideas, but I'm like, how might we? And when you ask that question, I find that when I ask the question, how might we do this, all of a sudden,
oh, the dam opens up, everything comes spilling out, right? It's like crowdsourcing the solution, and then you just keep going with it. Okay. Do any of these connect? What could you do over here? But without it, I think people will throw things out in a really creative way if they don't feel like it has to be the perfect answer, or they will be judged for it. Like,
right.
You should know better. You're a quote unquote scientist, right? It's like, well, pretend you're not, and you could do it any way you want. How might we do this?
Well, and who is missing from the room?
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's like I might ask a bunch of scientists, how is it that we can help you get your drugs and your ideas? A lot of them have great novel ideas in academia over that finish line. They call it the valley of death. It's this space between great ideas in academia and the fact that there's only been 12 drugs ever brought forward from start to finish, specifically for kids with cancer.
That's amazing. Like, like horrible. Amazing.
Right. So it's a huge problem. So 12 drugs ever. I know my son was never treated with a drug that was specifically designed for his cancer. And so, but every year we have 12 new drugs approximately developed for adults. And so 12 ever for kids and about 12 every year, so hundreds for adults. So I'm like, okay, how do we get it over? We call it the valley of death. How do we get it over this space between academia and this finish line of into an FDA trial? And I found out really early on, sometimes we're asking the wrong person, because really industry is the one that's really good at getting things over the finish line. I'm like, well, let's ask industry. They may not want to invest in it, but they might be able to advise us.
Yeah. You find that folks are open when you're asking them to be advisors rather than implementers at the beginning, or fixers?
Yeah, I think especially if it's off the record, maybe. So you can find inside champions who are able to share their insight about processes. I mean, we're not talking about asking them to talk about like proprietary processes or information, but just like, what are the big glitches and what are the roadblocks that we might face or whatever. And I do think, again, you have to understand what the limitations. Yeah, I had to get really comfortable with the fact that every one of these stakeholders has a strength or many strengths, and they also have challenges and roadblocks. And it can be very hurtful when you're a parent whose kid has died because of these roadblocks. So like, there's not enough money in it. Do you know how offensive that is when your beautiful kid has died? But at the same time, I'm like, I got to put that at the door. And I have to come to terms with the fact that these are legitimate roadblocks that I have to understand. And if I can't, I don't know, get comfortable with honesty from somebody, and then it's going to be a problem. So that could be my roadblock, right? My roadblock as an advocate could be that it's painful, and I have to get comfortable with that. So yeah, I think that as long as they feel like it's a safe place to tell a grieving mother, then I think it works out okay.
That's a scary thing to do. I'm pretending I'm that person or putting myself in that place, because I wouldn't want to overstep or to make things that are already terrible for you worse, right? If you're asking for my information or guidance or saying, hey, if you go this way, you're going to get shut down. Go this way first. I think that the sensitivity that you bring to actually being willing to, like one of my old board members used to say, just park your ego at the door, but you're talking about parking your real, true feelings. You can pick them up later, but you have to be with that person who you're asking them to help you and as a result, you're helping them. So,
well, I think this really is the answer to the question you asked at the beginning, which is, what is the difference between advocating for pediatric cancer versus maybe some other things? I mean, surely there are things like this that also that have a similar theme to it around this very emotion, but this pediatric cancer space in which you've got parents that are really spearheading these efforts, and there's a lot of emotions, we have to spend a lot of time training parents before they go in, whether it's to a legislator or somebody else. Listen, like, this other person is getting ready to listen to this very painful thing that you're getting ready to say, and we have to give them space to tell us the truth. And if it's too painful sounding, they may not be willing. Like, I mean, I leave a meeting with a legislator and I'm like, hey, before we leave here, I need you to tell me the truth about what the roadblock might be here. Well, or with pharma, does anybody really want to tell a parent? Well, I mean, for the numbers of kids that are impacted, it's just not worth the investment, or something terrible like that. And the fact of the matter is, if we can't find a way to become comfortable having very tough conversations, then we're not going to get the truth. And I think that's the sensitive place that I land in. And I don't lie. Like, after I have those kinds of conversations, sometimes I get in my car and I cry.
Absolutely. Because you're not denying your own humanity, you know. But sometimes it's like, this sounds callous, but sometimes you have to suck it up to get what your needs are, and you're in there for a purpose.
Right. And my purpose is that other families do not have to face what we did. I mean, it was so horrifying to me to find out how little had been done. And it's not because people weren't trying. I think we're in a very unique space right now in time in which the ability to come together through social media, and the fact that you're in another state right now having this conversation with me, we have this platform where we can come together in a way that we didn't used to be able to. I mean, childhood cancer is technically kind of rare. Parents don't want to hear it because it's so painful. There's a saying, not rare, not fair, because it really is more common than you would think. But at the same time, not maybe everybody knows like that one person or something like that. But when you're able to come together on social media or through these kinds of avenues, we're in a very unique place in time right now where I really feel that there's a lot of energy. I had a conversation with somebody who's been a CEO of a nonprofit for the last, I think, 15 years. And the first thing I did when I got on the phone was, thank you so much for all of your work. You must be exhausted, because it's so hard. But like, hey, you want to join what we're doing? Gosh, there's all these people out there kind of on a one woman or one man show for so long. And now we have the space to come together.
It's great to have that space because it can be very isolating otherwise,
Yeah.
and you need to, as a leader in a nonprofit, you're trying to project confidence in your mission, you're achieving your mission, but there's those moments when you just need someone you can talk to or partner with, who's like, in your sector, maybe not a different sector, but Robyn, you've offered so much today. I appreciate it. What is something you would like our listeners to take away from this conversation?
That childhood cancer is actually terrible. I mean, to be honest, it has personally, I would just say from the actual mission that we have in front of us as an organization, that we are faced with terribly difficult odds, especially with some recent funding cuts at the federal level. And that if you come upon somebody who is facing childhood cancer, certainly please get them in touch with a nonprofit. It's really a great space. As far as like nonprofit management is concerned, I probably feel like I could probably learn just as much from somebody else. Never be afraid to partner. Never be afraid to collaborate. It's really how I feel like we're supposed to be in community with each other. And so as far as nonprofit management is concerned, I feel like there can be this feeling of competitiveness. I don't have space for that. So instead, I feel like if you can find partners to do work with, you're probably going to succeed in your mission more easily.
I was told by a funder one time when I was doing I was evaluating their nonprofit and doing stakeholder outreach for them about their large funders, what they thought. And every single one, these were one-on-one interviews, but every single one, unbidden, because I said, what else would you like this organization to know? The one thing that really bugs us is when people tell us they don't know about someone else doing the work in the community. We know it because we fund it. We want you to be honest, right? There are other people you could partner with. And I thought, see, it's not a competition. People want you to partner and be successful so you can lift and leverage.
I would agree. Yeah, 100%. That's definitely our mantra. It is our core value, like outside of the fact that we do not believe in exploiting children for the purposes of our gain, collaboration is at the top of the heap for us.
So. I think you're right. We are intended to be in community, to have more impact, and to just live better as people.
Yep.
Robyn, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. I'm happy to have had this conversation with you. I know this will offer value to people, and I'll be thinking about you May 3rd.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, way to go.
You've been listening to Nonprofits Today with best-selling author, change agent, and strategic nonprofit coach, Sarah Box. You can grab the show notes and find out how to work with Sarah and the Sandbox team at sarahbox.com. We'd love this podcast to reach as many people as possible, so be sure to rate, review, and share this podcast with someone you think would get value from this conversation. And be sure to tune in and power up with future episodes of Nonprofits Today.